Okay, so today we are on lesson 11 of the booklet. What methods were used to treat and prevent illness during the 16th and 17th centuries? That is on page 27 and should look like this. Um, you should have completed the previous lessons before doing this lesson so that you can really understand what we're talking about in today's lesson. So obviously, to start us off, you just fill in the low stake quiz answers to the questions. Use your book to help you. That's the whole point of it. And you should be able to answer that quite easily. Today we're going to be working, well, from the first half, we're going to be working from the PowerPoint, and there'll be moments in this lesson where I ask you to pause and to think about maybe a question or a concept, just because there'll be things that I want you to recap on that aren't necessarily places in the booklet to do so. So like I said, today's lesson, so lesson 11, we're looking at what methods were used to treat and prevent illness during the 16th and 17th centuries. So we're still thinking about the Renaissance period, and we're focusing on the methods to treat and to prevent illness. Our lesson objective today is to analyse methods used to treat and prevent illness during the Renaissance and assess the level of medical progress made. Which brings me back to the idea of there is going to be a point where I ask you to pause the video, and that's just to be able to assess that level of medical progress. So when we think about medical progress, we measure it. So in the previous video, lesson 10, and your teachers probably have spoken about this to you anyway, we use the criteria of simples to assess medical progress. And by that I mean, when we think medical progress, what does that look like to us? So what we're doing today is to literally see treatments and methods when in the Renaissance. Has there been any change? Has there been any continuity? And does it look like there is progress happening in the Renaissance in terms of treatment and preventing illness? So what I'd like you to do first is, in a second, I'm going to ask you to pause the video. And what I want you to do is to literally recap medieval medical treatments, because we can't really be assessing the level of medical progress if we don't know what we're comparing to. We can't understand progress without comparing it to the previous time. So all I want you to do is to think of at least one example for each box, and don't do yourself a disservice by just kind of not pausing it and testing yourself. You're only harming yourself. So please make sure that we're looking at least one example for medical treatments in terms of treatments linked to the four humours, treatments linked to the theory of opposites, religion, miasma, superstition, and herbal treatments. So this is all available in your booklet. So go back through your booklet or whatever, the entire booklet that was sent to you in as a attached resource, and look through the lessons on treatments in the Middle Ages. Look through the lesson about healers to think about what they actually did and how they treated people, and think of at least one example. Obviously, if you have paper and pen available to you right next to you, you can make notes on it. So if you can just pause now and have a go. Okay, so you should have paused the video and had a go at trying to recap medieval treatment. And on the slide for you now are examples of those medieval medical treatments. So we have four humours. We have bloodletting, which we know was a big thing, purging and laxatives, the theory of opposites, so again linked to the four humours, thinking about how to balance the four humours, avoiding hot foods such as garlic and onions, cold foods and baths. We've got treatments linked to religion, so you may have thought of a lot more or others that I haven't written down here. So we have holy charms placed around the neck of sufferers, candles lit, prayers and fastings. You might have said going to touch the bones of saints, no wrestling in the churchyard, flagellants. So what they did, you may have come up with other ideas for prevention and treatments. We've got treatments linked to miasma, so people carrying sweet smelling herbs with them, fires being lit, church bells being rung. Superstition and folk remedies over here, if you just have a read. And then you have herbal treatments. Sorry. So when we're looking at assessing the level of progress, the reason why I've asked you to do this is just to really understand, well, what were medical treatments like in the Middle Ages? Now, we're going to stay on the PowerPoint for a bit before we even get to the booklet, and that's because, unfortunately, since you're watching this video, that means you would have missed out on a performance that your class teacher would have done for you. Not to say that they won't, they still might do when you are back with us, but that performance essentially was the idea that showing you examples of treatment in the Renaissance. So, just to give you some context here, and I'm just reading from the top here, on the 2nd of February 1685, King Charles II was taken ill. He could not speak and became unconscious. The royal doctors clustered around him trying to save his life. The details of the treatments were recorded by the chief physician, Sir Charles Scarborough, and a team of 12 doctors assembled at the king's side. So, obviously being the king, being royalty, you would expect that he's going to get the most, the top-notch kind of treatment. The treatment that's done on him is going to be the one that is supported by the most people. He's going to get the good stuff. So, in front of you, like I said, unfortunately, your teacher is not there to perform it. You have how they treated him. So, day 1 to day 6, so over 6 days, they treated him. And what I want you to do, and I'm happy for you to write this in your summary box, so make notes of the treatments that were given to or completed on King Charles. So I will read out maybe the first 2 bullet points and then show you what I mean by that and what I want you to kind of make bullet point notes on your summary box. So day 1, February the 2nd, the doctors carefully observed the king and recalled all the symptoms and treatments taken. Following Sydenham's approach, the doctors go to the bedside to learn as much as they can. The first course of action the doctors take is to open the vein in the king's right arm and draw off 16 ounces of blood. They then make cuts on his shoulders and use a cupping glass to draw off another 8 ounces. So straight away, when we're thinking about analysing progress and thinking about, how that has changed and how treatment, whether it's changed or stayed the same, straight away from that first bullet point, we can see that the doctors go to the bedside. Now that is a phrase that you should have learned last lesson, so from the previous video, which was something Thomas Sydenham encouraged. So already we can see, when we're assessing progress, we can see some change. Let's move on to the second bullet point. So over here, it says draw off 16 ounces of blood and then cupping glass to draw off another 8 ounces. So that is taking blood from King Charles, and they use that as a treatment. Now, if you think back to what you said was medical treatments in the Middle Ages, that definitely sounds a lot, well, it's bloodletting. So the fact that King Charles was blood was being taken from him as a form of treatment, already we know that bloodletting continued. So what I would want you to do is in your summary box, just to make a note and details, so if you do like a subheading of King Charles II in the summary box, and then bullet point his treatment. So you would write down here 16 ounces of blood, 8 ounces of blood. So if you can, again, just pause the video and do that. Okay, so you should have, after reading that, been able to identify the kind of treatments that were available for King Charles, and that should already give you an idea of whether you think, things have changed, and thinking about the level of medical progress made so far. Now, moving on to our booklet. So once you've done that and you've recapped the Middle Ages treatment and you've had a look at what happened to King Charles, what you have to do, the main activity in your booklet anyway, is to read through each sort of source and then weigh up if the treatments show change from the Middle Ages, show progress, whether you think they are effective. So what you would do is it tells you over here the things that you should be questioning. I would suggest as you read through, you highlight or underline any key information. And then you need to write a tiny assessment. So what that means is you just need to assess whether there was change or whether things stayed the same, whether you think that sort of treatment is effective and whether that shows progress. Remember, when we think about progress in medicine, we think about the Simples criteria. We think about whether those people are actually getting better or being treated or diagnosed any better than before. So we'll pick one to do together. So we'll do this first one. Bleeding, purging, and sweating were still very common medical treatments and were also used to prevent illness. So straight away it tells us bleeding, purging, and sweating were still very common. So straight away we know, well, that's not a lot of change then, because that's what happened in the Middle Ages. Doctors still believed in the four humours and continued to use bleeding and purging to balance the body, even though it often did considerable harm. So again, I don't think actually if you can actually highlight on this unless you have your paper copy. So you can just click here, insert a text box, and then start writing down your kind of your assessment. So whether you think that is change, progress, whether you think it's effective, and just put in the examples in here. From here, if you can't highlight it. So if we just continue reading. So even though it did considerable harm, increased interest in alchemy meant that people looked for chemical cures for disease. So alchemy is the study of chemical medication. The College of Physicians published a manual which contained remedies from salts, metals, and minerals. Mercury was used for the disease syphilis. So it kind of tells us two things here. It tells us in the first half that, bloodletting was still something that continued. The four humours was still a concept that people believed caused disease. People still believed that imbalanced humours would make someone sick. They still did similar treatments of doing bleeding, purging, and sweating, which again you should have been able to see from the King Charles activity. However, so that first half, you may write something like there was limited change because, and then explain why you think so, and then pick out some examples. But then when you kind of read the bottom half of this box, it talks to you about an increased interest. So that means that's something that's new. The interest of it is new and it's becoming more popular and looking for chemical cures. It also tells you about publishing a manual, which contains remedies from salts, metals, and minerals. So if you think about Middle Ages, you need to question whether that was something that was done. Did the College of Physicians ever publish a manual? Because if they didn't, then you would argue, well, that actually is progress. That is change. And you'd pick out again why you say that. Now, if you remember with the context of the Renaissance period, we have the printing press. We have things that allow us in the Renaissance period to publish information manuals about how to treat people. So this box here, you would kind of talk a little bit about what has stayed the same, what has kind of changed, and whether you think that shows progress. Whether you think publishing a manual shows progress, whether you think bloodletting is that effective, because it tells us here that it did considerable harm. So just looking at the evidence in this information box and writing an assessment explaining whether you think there was change, progress, and whether you think it was effective. You have to do this for each one. So we have a very important book here. So Complete Herbal, Nicholas Culpeper's Complete Herbal. And this is key for that specific knowledge that you need in the GCC history course, medicine course. So again, reading through the same thing and thinking, well, is that change? This dependent on more herbal remedies? Would you say that that is something that has increased from the Middle Ages? Thinking about what people were now exposed to. So over here, without kind of giving it all away, it talks about the new lands that were discovered, America and Asia. And with that, when you think about herbal treatments, that basically means, things that come from the earth that people would have used as herbal remedies. So we have rhubarb, things like aloe vera, using the earth, using plants, vegetables, using those things to treat people. What is it saying over here in terms of, is that a new interest? Is that change? Would you argue that's progress? Do you reckon that's effective? And again, do the same thing for that one. Moving on to the fourth box, it talks about, again, without giving it completely away, the idea of religion. So we know that the church absolutely dominated the Middle Ages. So treatment was heavily on the idea that God would save those people if it was his kind of wish. The thing that you had to do was to please God and to pray. And it talks about the idea of King Charles being a God's representative on earth, and the idea that a strong belief in God actually continued. So again, you need to question whether that was change or progress or effective, and thinking about that. And then our last one, we look at superstitious examples. So again, you need to question whether that's changed. So has that continued from the Middle Ages? Has that become more of a thing? Would you argue that that's progress in terms of medicine? Do you reckon that that's an effective form of treatment? So this shouldn't take you too long, but it's about really making sure that you're reading each part, because each box has some key knowledge that you need, and just being able to really analyze what you think progress looks like, and whether you think things have changed in the Renaissance period from the Middle Ages. Now, it's really important to kind of understand that change, because the last bit of this lesson anyway is to write a paragraph that compares the treatments used in the Middle Ages and those used in the Renaissance period. You also have an example in your booklet. So over here it says, essentially there was little difference between treatments used in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. Many medieval people were superstitious and so used cures based on magic to treat illness, such as one cure for toothache, which involved hanging the beak of a magpie around the patient's neck. So over there it tells you the first part of the structure that you need in this to answer this type of question. So it's really important that when you're comparing something from one period of time to another, you have specific factual evidence from both time periods. So you can just add that on in your booklet. And language that compares and contrasts. So if that's giving you the first part, you should be able to see that, okay, so it's identified the first time period, the Middle Ages, and it's given examples of treatments from that time. Your language that compares and contrasts, not everywhere, it's here where it says likewise during the Renaissance. Okay, so you may argue that things have stayed the same or are different, or is different. However, obviously, when we're thinking about treatments used in the Middle Ages and treatments used in the Renaissance, we don't see a lot of change in that, there's still this strong belief in God. There's still this idea of bloodletting. So the kind of way, and I'm going to write down the structure that I would like you to write in this area here for you to do. So it's example from the Middle Ages, again, use the example bit here to base it on. So obviously that can be, it's talking about treatments used in Middle Ages. So you can use, you know, the idea of God, the idea of bloodletting. This one over here is the superstitious things. Again, you can rewind the video to recap on what we said was the treatments in the Middle Ages. Now, it's really important that you do explain. So, sorry, the first bit would be your point, which is identifying whether you think those treatments were the same or whether they're different. So if you said that there was little difference, it'd be something like there was little difference between treatments, or treatments in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance period were very similar. So a point would be to state whether it is similar or different. You then need to identify one example from the time period before, so an example from the Middle Ages. You then need your comparative language. So again, you've got stuff like likewise, similarly. This can be seen in, okay? So we need to make sure that we have a clear comparative statement, because the whole point of this task here is to compare two time periods. You then need your example from the latter time period. So in this case, it's the Renaissance. Now, it's important that you follow the structure when writing this paragraph here, because it will inform an exam skill, but we'll look at that later on in the booklet probably. Okay, thank you.